suburbs in Melbourne are going to look very different if the state government's new residential zones are implemented, and that's set to happen not very far away. But it'll affect house prices differently in different suburbs. How will it play out? We're going to chat to a property expert in just a second and take your calls. 1300 222 774. So the residential zones 1, 2 and 3 are going to be replaced with a residential growth zone where you can build up, the general residential zone and the neighbourhood residential zone, which have quite strict limits on how high you can go and how dense your developments can be. But that's going to push development into certain areas of Melbourne and completely restrict it in others. And the councils have quite a lot of power. So we'll find out what shape our city might have in the future and whether we might see a flow-on effect out to regional towns as well. 1300 222 774. Text messages 0437 774 774. 26 minutes to 9 o'clock. It's only 10 days or so until the state government brings in new residential zoning rules for Melbourne. What's it going to mean for the suburb you call home? Will you be restricted in how much you can subdivide? Will there be tower blocks going up along your railway line? And all that kind of thing. Greville Pabst joins us. He is the CEO and co-founder of the WBP Property Group. Morning, Greville.
Good morning, Hilary.
Now, what does this all mean? What new zones? How different are things going to be?
Well, really, the one residential zone is going to be replaced by 3 new zones: a neighbourhood zone, a general zone, and the growth zone. Now, depending upon whether you're a developer or whether you're an investor or whether you're a homeowner, these changes are going to have an effect on your property for good or for worse, depending on which camp you are in. So essentially, the main change is with the neighbourhood zone, and essentially that is a protected zone, and so its aim is to protect and preserve neighbourhood character within those traditional leafy suburbs of Melbourne where you have heritage overlays. Now, the main change here is that it's going to really prohibit development. So it is going to restrict development where there's neighbourhood character in a neighbourhood zone to only 2 dwellings per site, and it's going to have a height control of no more than 8 metres in height.
You have to have a site of a certain size before you can even put the 2 dwellings on it, don't you?
Well, that's right, and there's also and this can vary from council to council. And I must say from the outset, I'm not a town planning expert. I'm a property expert, and I'm interested in these changes because it can drive value in one way or another, and it can affect people's buying behaviours. And that's really interesting for me because I think one of the key things is that when you constrict supply in a certain zoning, I believe that's going to have an effect on price. And
is it going to go up?
Well, in the neighbourhood zone, I believe it will because it's going to force developers to move out of those inner city areas and move into the middle ring and to the outer ring suburbs. So once you constrict supply in those protected zones, there's still strong demand for family homes, and people want to live in those inner city. They want to be within those leafy villages. That's where everyone wants to live. And as supply is constrained, it's going to cause, I believe, prices to rise over time. This is not going to happen overnight, but I think over time we are going to see price growth within that protected zone. The middle and outer suburbs, the zonings are going to affect things in different ways. I think particularly developers by these changes will have to move into those general and growth zones in order to get their permits to do their medium density and higher density development. And that's really going to change the whole fabric of those traditional family homes in those middle ring suburbs. And people need to, I think, just be aware of these changes. Go to the local council, just check how these particular changes in zoning are going to affect you. If you're buying property, once again, get that advice have a look at the local council and see how it affects you, because you don't want to be buying a property in a middle ring suburb or an outer suburb and then suddenly find that there's a development application right next door to you for a medium density housing development. It may not be what you intended, and you're not going to be, invariably you might not be happy about that. So get the advice up front and be aware before you buy, and understand, if you're already an existing holder, where you stand on this position.
And depending where you live, you may have questions for Greville Pabst from the WBP Property Group about what these changes to residential zoning laws might mean for you. Are you in a suburb where prices might go up as supply decreases, or are you in a suburb where you're going to get lots of development, and how is that going to affect any investment you might make, or whether your kids can afford to live near you? 1300 222 774 is the phone number. You can text in on 0437 774 774. And Mark's texted in, Greville, saying the people who have endorsed these new changes will be the same people who will be complaining about the fact there'll be no scaled down property for them to live in 10 years' time. How will it affect people's ability to downsize in those suburbs where there's such restriction on development?
Well, look, I think what this is going to do, it's going to increase the supply of medium density housing in those middle ring suburbs. And look, it's not to say, and I don't want to just say that the inner city is totally protected by a neighbourhood zone. That's not correct at all. In fact, if you look at, say, for example, Glen Ira, 65% of Glen Ira is a designated neighbourhood zone. 30% is general zone and 5% is growth zone. So each individual municipality, and including the inner ones such as Yarra and Stonington and Burrendale, all of those, they all have provision in that zoning for the three types of zones that we're talking about.
But the council gets to choose how much goes into the residential growth zone, where you can have a bit more flexibility with your building. And most of the councils have chosen to put like 0.2% of their area in that. So there's really very little room to grow if the power is left to the councils, isn't it?
Well, the development is going to be encouraged, particularly along main roads, around retail strips and transport nodes.
That's in a different zone, isn't it? The mixed-use zones?
That's where they want to see it. That is certainly in the mixed-use zone, and that's where they want to encourage medium and high-density development. The growth zone, which will be a percentage of every inner-city suburb, essentially is going to restrict the development to 4 stories. Okay, so it'll be medium density housing. It'll be 4 stories, and there is a height control there of 13.5 metres. The general zone is sort of in between. It's in between the growth zone and the neighbourhood zone, and it will encourage like 3-storey medium density housing. In some cases 4-storey, but there will be a height control there of no more than 9 metres.
But again, I mean, if you've got 83% of the suburb locked into these non-growth zones, the general residential and neighbourhood residential zone, that's going to really limit the amount of development you can have, even if you've got the mixed-use zones and the residential growth zones happening. So if councils are obviously listening to their ratepayers, many of whom might be NIMBYs, I don't want this massive high-density thing, and you can understand why the councils would do that, then where's that development going to go?
Well, that's right. It has to go. It has to go outside, and of course, everybody does want to live in those leafy streets with those heritage landscapes, and so people will have to go out into those middle and outer suburbs. And as I said earlier, the streetscape and fabric is going to, I think, over time, completely change. And if a whole street and a whole areas of suburbs change their character from those traditional 3-bedroom brick veneer homes to something different, what's that going to do to the values over time in those suburbs? There will be obviously developers are going to come along with big checks because in the short term, because they're going to make more money out of being able to get more lots on those particular blocks. However, over time, if you're an investor, or what effect is that going to have? Because you're actually going to increase supply of that medium density housing in those middle and outer suburbs, over time, what effect is that going to have on price? It's probably maybe not so good. It's going to be maybe in the short term, developers are going to write a check, but longer term, is it going to be a good investment to buy in those areas?
It'd be really interesting. 1300 222 774. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions on this. We have with us Greville Pabst, who's the CEO of WBP Property Group, and we can chat about what kind of impact these changes might have on the house prices and values in the suburbs where you live. And is it true that you would want to live in the leafy suburbs and that is going to drive demand? 1300 222 774. You can text 0437 774 774. Brian's called in from Essendon. Morning, Brian.
Hi, Hilary.
We can just hear you, Brian. You were part of the advisory group for Plan Melbourne, were you?
Yes, I was the economist for Plan Melbourne.
Yep. And what did that role involve?
Well, the basic difference between Plan Melbourne and many other plans is that it looks at jobs and investment as the base. In other words, it's not just about where you live. It's actually, you don't live anywhere if you haven't got a job. So if you have a look at Plan Melbourne, jobs and investment is the central part of working through a new city with new infrastructure.
Yep.
And so I get concerned when I hear comments, as we've been hearing this morning, about lack of supply or restriction of supply, when the kind of work that was done indicated there's a minimum of 30 years supply of medium density as we currently know it. 30 years. I mean, I don't think people have done the sums behind.
But where is that supply, Brian? I guess that's the key question.
That's 30 years supply in existing residential zones, in other words, in the growth zones, and in the areas, for example, including Fisherman's Bend, Yarra, Cremorne, the brownfields of Egate. There's already a 30-year supply. This idea that there's any restriction, it just doesn't stack up with the numbers, Hilary. But
if you've got the figures I've been reading are that the councils who have control over what goes into the residential growth zone, where you can actually do some high-density development, the councils have got control over that, and they're saying we're going to put 0.2% of our catchment area into that zone, and the rest of it you can't build above 3 or 4 stories. Then where does that leave room?
But that's not going to happen. That's what some councils, and only a couple, would like to do. I've actually prepared housing strategies for other municipalities, and most municipalities actually want their residents to live, work, and recreate, and have a complete lifestyle in their own municipality. Most municipalities are actually reasonable and understand there's demand for apartments.
Is there a schism between the inner and outer municipalities? Because the City of Melbourne's got, I think, 4% in the growth zone, City of Port Phillip 5%, 3% in the City of Yarra, 5% in Stonington.
But you're not adding. But you see, to that, you're not adding all of the brownfields.
So the infill industrial sites.
So another 30 years supply minimum.
Let's hear from Greville here.
See, Brian, you are right. I mean, there are infill sites, and one of them is Fisherman's Bend, which is a supply of medium density housing for the next 40 years, and that area alone is twice the size of the CBD. And you did mention Egate. There's another 20-hectare site on the old fruit and veggie market there on Footscray Road. So there is infill development. There is a supply of it. I think the key change is really in those leafy protected streets where the main change is that is a 2-lot maximum dual occupancy development. That's the key change, and which is going to protect those traditional inner city areas.
Well, the biggest issue is not supply, you see. What we've got here is certainty. I think it's great. I live in Essendon, and I'm next to I will be next to a proposed growth zone. I don't mind. I'm in a leafy green. My view is that I want to be able to have an apartment in 10 years' time in my area, and I'm prepared to be part of the change. This 0.2% and 0.3%, when you see the final numbers on a per municipality basis, what you'll see is in region by region, so that people can move around within a region, at least 30 years supply. And you know, these are great debates to have, but I just don't think it'll go the way you're thinking.
Well, it's really interesting to get your thoughts. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Hilary. Bye-bye.
1300 222 774 is our number. Let's take some more calls with Greville Pabst. We have him until 9 o'clock, and it's about 12 minutes to 9 now. Chris is in Baldwin. Hi, Chris.
Hello there, how are you?
Well, thanks. What's your thought?
Well, I had a question actually. I'm in one of these green and leafy streets, and my street is going to be rezoned to the growth zone. There was objection locally. The reason the council gave was that there were already several unit developments in the street. And to be honest, I'm in Burundara. I think they ran out of streets that they could zone, and they weren't getting up to their to the target that the government wanted. But my question is, long term, what does your guest think impact will have on the value of my property?
In Baldwin, that's going to happen in Greville?
Good morning, Chris. Within a growth zone, it's going to encourage developers to build medium density housing up to 4 stories. So I'm not sure, of the particular street that you're referring to and what its current character and mix is. But over time, I would expect that it will change. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will change, and the character will change. Now, it will change perhaps from a owner-occupier street to something quite different. To a medium density thing where you're going to have more tenants, you're going to have more garbage bins out the front on your footpath, and more disruption and noise. And so over time, I'm not sure whether, as an investment that is necessarily could be a good thing in terms of price growth. I think in the short term, developers will pay more for your site, but longer term, depending on where it is. If you increase supply, it does have a direct correlation to price.
Well, and, when you get towards retirement and you think, I'd like a smaller place and I can sell this site that I own to a developer, where does that leave you? Do you then need to move much further out to get a smaller spot?
Well, within all of these municipalities, there is. It's pretty much catered for. I mean, there are growth protected zones, and my belief is that some people will take the developer's money and they will then use that money to move into the safe haven of a protected zone.
Interesting debate. We'll continue it soon. It's 10 minutes to 9. We're joined by Greville Pabst from the WBP Property Group to discuss the new residential zoning laws that are coming into place very soon. I think it's only 10 days or so away, Greville.
Yeah, 1st of July. 1st of July, the councils have been instructed to implement those plans.
So what change will we see on the 1st of July if we take in a planning application?
Well, the councils are supposed to have implemented that. I think there'll be some leeway because I think some municipalities still nutting it out. And so I think there'll be a bit of leeway, and I don't think it'd be really enforced in the short term. But over time, I think, certainly planning applications will come under the new regime in most cases.
And as you said before, good idea to go and do the research at the council and see what they've got in mind. And as we mention every week, the information we're providing is general and shouldn't be considered personal advice. You'll need to seek some independent advice before you make any investment decisions. So many text messages on 0437 774 774. Isn't Fisherman's Bend going to be underwater with sea level rise? What's the point in building there? Neighbourhood residential zones, says Russell from Sandringham, can double the number of residences, so this increases the opportunity to reside in a leafy area. I'm sorry, this expert clearly doesn't understand how much ex-industrial and manufacturing land is being unlocked in inner area rejuvenation. Fisherman's Bend, for example. We need hubs like the north end of Chapel Street. Though, Greville, how much ex-industrial and manufacturing land is around in the leafy suburbs? Is there actually a potential to unlock that land, or are we stuck with what there is already?
Well, there is certainly some infill, and Fisherman's Bend was mentioned, and I concur with that. I think what I'm interested in is good investment and property growth requires a strategy, and I certainly would take my clients and investors to locations where I know supply is going to be constrained. And if it's in a leafy inner city street close to a village and close to lifestyle and cafes, and I know that a developer can't come in here next door and build, 3-story or 4-story, that's a big tick for me. And it should be a big tick for my clients and investors and people in general who are buying real estate.
Mike's in Bentley on the line. Morning, Mike.
Good morning.
What would you like to tell us about?
I just wanted to mention the recent sale of 3 properties in a job lot to a Chinese developer in Bentley that were in a residential, growth zone beside the railway station. And previously, I would have anticipated those properties would have been worth about $900,000 each because they weren't renovated. The Chinese developer paid $5.75 for the 3, so that equated to about $190,000 each.
After 600 metres.
I'm afraid we're getting your GPS there, Mike, too. That's interesting. Any comment on that, Greville?
Well, look, without knowing the particular development and you know, like anybody, I say always before you buy, get independent property advice, get a valuation. So I don't know on what basis the Chinese have purchased this particular site, whether they did get any advice or not. Certainly, I suppose, you know, being able to consolidate 3 individual titles, which will enable them to get greater flexibility with their proposed development, is, you know, may come at a premium, because what that then means to the Chinese developer is that he's got more. They have more scale in that they can pour one slab across 3 lots rather than pour 3 individual slabs, and there's economies of scale and cost savings in consolidating a site like that.
Thanks, Mike. And just a quick word on the Chinese investment issue. I was reading up on this on Crikey the other day, and apparently the total foreign investment in residential property in Australia fell over the last couple of years, but also the foreign residential real estate investment skews towards new dwelling construction, so they're driving growth and providing stock. Also, they're just one step behind the United States and Canada. So it's interesting when people talk about Chinese in particular investment in property growth. It seems to be a fear rather than a fact.
It's overstated.
Yeah, Jeff in Beaumaris. Morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
What's your thoughts on this?
Being active in the actual residential development market, there's one thing, whether you agree or not with the new plans, they are what they are. However, people don't realise the implementation phase of this is probably 12 to 18 months, which is going to provide 12 to 18 months of uncertainty until such time as the councils come out with their views on this. What you'll find in the current climate right now, you go to 3 different councils on the same zoning, you'll get 3 different answers. You'll go to the same council and ask 3 different planners, and you'll get 3 different answers. The problem is, within the councils, there's no leadership. The implementation of this will be a flaw in the system, and that needs to be fixed and implemented as quickly as possible, because as each day passes and there's uncertainty, it doesn't allow us to get on with the job of building retirement villages, little 2-bedroom units where it's allowable now, and other things. And that's one factor that any changes of this magnitude cause in the marketplace, which, bottom line, everyone pays for it at the end of the day.
That's a really interesting perspective, isn't it? And I guess we'll have to wait and see how it plays out in council. Some of them might be better prepared than others, but it's a really interesting caution. Elizabeth's in Waverley. Morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
What's your comment here?
My comment is that Greville's talking about it being difficult for people to live in the leafy suburbs in future. If the restrictions are relaxed anymore, in favour of developers, there won't be any green leafy suburbs because it will be all concrete. And I think it's all very well to talk about providing accommodation, but the social consequences of what's being done to suburbs all over Melbourne with these sort of plans is something that should be seriously considered by anybody who thinks about it, apart from estate agents and developers.
So obviously Elizabeth's quite worried about the impact on her suburb. Greville, what's your thoughts about that?
Good morning, Elizabeth. No, I'm saying the contrary. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the zonings, particularly in the leafy suburbs within the neighbourhood zone, is actually going to protect the homeowner. It will prohibit developers from developing within that particular area. So it's actually going to be a good thing for existing homeowners because it's going to drive developers out into the growth and the new general zone.
It'd be good for homeowners in the leafy suburbs,
yeah,
which will stay leafy.
Yeah.
Then the other ones will get developed. Interesting. What are your thoughts on that? Janet is in Glen Ira. Hi, Janet.
Hi. I'm really, really upset and concerned about this. I'm in one of the brown zones where I can now have a 3-storey building built on my boundary. And for the last 5 years, Glenora has been considerably overdeveloped, and they don't build nice apartment buildings. They build blue board slums where you can hear the person fart in the room next to you and you can barely get a single bed in the room.
So is it the quality, Janet, or the quantity that you're worried about?
Both. Unfortunately, we're I've always thought it was fantastic that we were close to our local station, but that's what been one of the catalysts for determining that we can have 3-storey developments. And also, we're unfortunately one train station away from Caulfield Station, which is where Monash University Caulfield campus is. So all they build is accommodation for foreign students, and they are pretty much blue board slums.
And I guess that's driven by the developer dollar. Greville, any quick comments on that?
Oh, good morning, Janet. Yeah, look, I can sympathise because, it is going to affect certain areas, and you didn't buy into an area like that when you signed the contract, bought a house, and you didn't necessarily expect that they're going to allow this development next door. So it is going to change the whole where we live and what we buy and where we invest.
Thanks so much for all your calls, and thank you, Greville Pabst from WBP Property Group, for chairing this discussion today. It's been interesting.
Thanks, Hilary.
And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to John and Robert and Terry and all the people who've been waiting. It was such a feisty discussion. Do keep your thoughts coming in on text 0437 774 774. And a quick reminder that some people do like to live in the north, apparently. Good to know.